Oh! I just shredded a differential. So that's not good. We're back working on the Corolla, and one of the first things I want to do is, this thing has no traction. It's got some 6-inch wide tires on it that are like 22 inches in diameter, and I have this set of wheels. These are some 16s versus the 13-inch wheels that are on it, and we're gonna see how these things fit up on the Corolla. I'm not sure that they're gonna fit super well, but there's only one way to find out. I'm gonna jack it up, I'm gonna put it on the front, see if I have steering, make sure it clearances everything, and do the same in the rear and make sure there's no rubbing or anything crazy like that. If everything looks good, I've got a full set of 4 of these. I'm gonna probably get a nice set of tires for them, and we'll be able to get, hopefully, more traction to the ground, because with these 155s, there's just not a whole lot of rubber, and on top of that, the date code on these tires is 2003. So these tires are literally over 20 years old and tiny. So we need to change that if we're planning on getting any power to the ground. Well, when I was putting the new wheels on the Corolla, I came to a pretty sad realization. They would not fit. They rubbed the strut with the wide wheels. These things are 8 inches wide. The wheels are 7, but tires are 8. And it rubbed the suspension, so it would not turn up front. They did fit in the rear, but I didn't really want to have that big of a staggered difference. So I went ahead and I went over to my 82 Supra, and I pulled the 14s off of there. They're also just a little bit bigger in diameter than the 155 80 R13s. Now we've got some 185 65 R14s. They're a little bit bigger, and they are 1.5 inches wider. 7.4 inches wide, whereas the 13s that came off of this thing were 6.05 inches wide. So just over 6 inches wide. There's a ton more meat here. When you compare the two side by side, you can really tell the difference. These are a ton wider, they're a little bit bigger, and I know they're gonna have to give me more traction. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna finish throwing all 4 of the Supra wheels on the Corolla, and in all honesty, I don't think it looks too bad. Well, I just discovered something less than ideal. I was swapping out the wheels and tires on the Corolla. I'm not sure if you can see all that oil on the rear differential. I thought, oh no, my rear differential is leaking. And then I started looking closer, and it's my transmission. There's a pretty big puddle of oil under it, and it looks like it's been dripping, and there's some oil soaking kind of everything back here. So I guess I'm gonna get this last tire on. I'm gonna pull it in the garage, we're gonna jack it up, we're gonna check out what's going on with the transmission output seal. Hopefully it's just a seal or something simple. I know the drive shaft was a little bit tight, a little bit too long. Hoping that isn't a big issue. If it is, I might loosen everything on this rear axle up and see if I can slide it back even just like a 1/4 inch, because it all went together. It was just a hair tighter than I liked, and I think it might be causing an issue now. Regardless, I'm gonna get this last tire on, pull it in the garage, and take a closer look at it. Before we get any further into today's video, I'm gonna take a second to address a really big issue I've been fighting for a long time. My garage is an absolute mess. We have got so much stuff everywhere, and we need to fix that. And that's all about to change thanks to today's video sponsor, FlexiSpot. FlexiSpot has some amazing products that are going to completely and totally transform the workflow, productivity, and cleanliness of the garage. Starting with their E7 Plus Premium Standing Desk. This desk is amazing. It's adjustable in height from 26 inches to over 51 inches in height, and it's capable of lifting 440 pounds. With its 4-legged design, it is incredibly sturdy, and even at its max height, feels very secure. One of my favorite things about this is if you're like me and it's hard for you to sit still for long periods of time, it gets draining, it's hard to stay focused, and your productivity level goes down. Having a standing desk really helps mitigate those issues. And when I'm done using it as a desk to edit or do office work on, it's as easy as setting my laptop aside and moving it over. This has become my new go-to workbench. I can, with the push of a button, lift this engine and myself to whatever height I need because this desk is seriously just that amazing. And now I have an amazing workbench to build an engine on. On top of the amazing workbench and desk possibilities that the E7 Plus standing desk has, the GR48 storage rack is an amazing storage solution. It is capable of holding up to 600 pounds. It is 4 feet by 8 feet, so it holds so much stuff up there. Right now we've got everything from long metals to a bunch of storage totes. There's multiple disassembled engines up there, and it's all super sturdy, hung from the ceiling and out of the way. I can work under it. It's freed up a ton of space and a bunch of shelving. Thank you, FlexiSpot, for sponsoring today's video. Now, back to the Corolla. Still does burnouts.
Start it up.
It's been inside for less than 5 minutes. And there's a drip. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna try and figure out what's going on. You can tell that it's been soaking everything back here in oil. And that's very less than ideal. So I've got the whole rear end kind of torn apart. The car's on jack stands, the axle's on jack stands, and I have the axle centering pin, and there's this sleeve that goes around this rubber bushing that goes around the centering pin and then centers on this little bracket, and this is obviously the bottom plate. So what I'm doing is, in order to get an extra, it's only like a little more than 1/8 of an inch of room, but 1/8 of an inch is probably all I need. I cut this out of the rubber piece so that we can now slide the axle back that extra 1/8 inch or so, which will help with everything. And I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna jump under there and try and move the whole drive shaft back because I think the drive shaft is pushing really hard into the output shaft of the transmission. So I'm gonna try and figure out how I can get this back as far as possible to hopefully remedy that issue at least a little bit. I'm not guaranteeing I can get it 100% fixed, but if I can get an 1/8 inch or so, that could be enough to make it not near as bad and hopefully make the next seal last more than 15 miles. Got the axle back in and we got everything torqued down. So then I went ahead and I pulled off the drive shaft and I found my issue. So I'm not sure if you can see up in there. That seal is in 2 pieces. So pretty confident that's the reason that the seal was leaking. Generally, in order to seal oil, you need to be 1 piece and not 2. So we're gonna pull that out, see about putting a new seal in there, and also since I moved the axle back, I'm gonna do everything I can to get this drive shaft as far back as possible. It's all we can do for now. In the end, I might need to get a drive shaft or something made, but I don't want to do that because I don't feel like this rear end is going to be long for life. Got a feeling this rear end might kaplooey sooner than later, and when it does, I'm going to need to put a new axle under this thing, and when I put a new axle under this thing, I'm going to need to have a drive shaft made. So if I'm going to be doing that for a new axle, I'd prefer not to do it for this axle because then I'll be doing it twice. We went ahead and we pulled the rear axle back as far as we could. I also loosened the motor mounts and the transmission mounts and yanked everything as far forward as I could because we're fighting for like 1/4 inches right now. We're not needing a whole bunch, but this morning I went ahead and I bought a new seal. And this new seal is the right diameter and fits on the drive shaft and everything. But one of the things that's cool about it is it's a lot thinner. So it being thinner is good because that means I can push it further into the transmission and hopefully keep it away from rubbing the drive shaft. Because you can see where this one was rubbing the drive shaft. It's just, there's not much there. In fact, if this one was in there all the way as far as it could be, I don't think it would have been rubbing the drive shaft. And with the rear end being moved and the transmission, transmission and engine being moved forward just a hair, I am sure that I should have enough room for it not to rub. But we're gonna go find out. So I'm gonna install this, I'm gonna put the drive shaft back in, and hopefully there's enough room for it to move just a little bit without rubbing the seal, and this seal lasts longer. I also grabbed some gear oil so that I can top up the transmission, make sure the rear end's got gear oil. Got the drive shaft back in the Corolla. I think we have just enough room that it's not gonna be an issue anymore. I know suspension travel is gonna move in and out a little bit, but going down there, there is just enough room. I'm not sure if you can see super well up in there, but it is actually about a 1/4 inch further out than it was. I went ahead, I started the Corolla, I put it in gear, I left it in 5th for probably 2 or 3 minutes, just spinning the drive shaft, putting the wheels to work, and there were no leaks. So that's a good sign. I think this might be at least a temporary fix for now. Like I said, I am going to need a new drive shaft when I do need a rear end, because this ring and pinion is absolutely tiny, and I just got a feeling that once I start putting some power adders on this engine, that rear end is gonna be short-lived. So for now, I'm gonna take it off. We're gonna take it for a few street drives, hit some bumps, see how it does, make sure it doesn't leak, and if there's no more issues, I'm gonna schedule myself a dyno appointment, because I wanna see how much power this thing is making. I know it's not gonna be a super impressive number. It's a stock ECU, stock engine, nothing done to it. So it's probably gonna be in the realm of like 120 to 130 wheel horsepower, if that. But I wanna have a good baseline number so we can know where we're going from here, see what we've done, how much it's increased, and how much power we've added to this thing with every step along the way. Because next, after we get this thing running good, I wanna get a track time, a dyno number, and then I'm gonna put this thing on a full standalone engine management system. And that's going to give us the ability to tune the engine, tune the fuel, tune all of that, and get a better idea of how much power this engine is capable of in stock, naturally aspirated form. As I was lowering the Corolla down, I realized something pretty darn cool. I knew this car was light. I didn't quite understand how light. So, rear tires on the ground. And I can do reps lifting my car. I understand the jack stands are a little bit further back than the front wheels, but the fact that I can lift the rear end of this car into the air is pretty impressive to me. It just goes to show how light this chassis is and how much power 450 horsepower is really gonna be when this thing weighs less than 2,000 pounds. Got the Corolla out of the garage, and this is going to be a good test drive. We're gonna go make sure the drive shaft doesn't have any issues. And on top of that, it's gonna be the first drive on the meats, as I'm calling them, the 185s versus the 155s. Like I said, these are 1.5 inches wider. You can really see how much more meat they've got on them. And hopefully this helps with our traction issues, because taking off from a stop, even just slightly aggressively, not dumping the clutch or anything, it would spin the back tire. It is an open diff, so it's only a 1-tire fire, so it's a lot easier to spin, especially with the solid axle. One side can unload easier than with an IRS. But I'm really excited to see how this thing does, so I'm gonna take it for a cruise, and hopefully we've solved a few of our issues. That rear end sounds rough. I have very little mechanical sympathy for my cars. I just shredded my rear differential. Oh yeah. Yeah, this differential is good for, when you ask how much power it's good for, they tell you that stock it's on the brink of destruction. I launched it pretty hard in second gear, and then there was no moss. I put bigger tires on it, and that was probably a mistake. And I was gonna launch it just to, you know, see what it felt like. It felt crunchy. Well, remember how I was saying that I didn't want to make a drive shaft because I had a feeling I was gonna shred this rear differential sooner than later? Well, I just shredded this rear differential. I don't even think it's gonna get me home. Yeah. Well, my rear drive shaft's spinning, and the differential's not. So that's fun. Oh boy. I guess I'm gonna get this thing towed or pushed home. Well, I done messed up. So I'm gonna push this thing home now. Luckily it's not very heavy. Oh, differentialing. Yeah. No worries. I appreciate that, man. Cool neighbors are cool. Whew. So I got the Corolla back home, pushed into the garage and on a jack. I already know that the rear diff's bad. I guess I'm just kind of seeing how bad at this point. Well, that is one very spinny drive shaft, and this tire is very not spinny. So, I'd say that my rear differential is, well, as I like to say, differential soup. Since I've got differential soup, I've got a couple different options for axles. I guess I'm gonna take a few measurements, think about it for a minute, and decide what's gonna be best for me. Because I was supposed to hit the dyno this week, and I've got a feeling I'd pound out a whopping 0 horsepower with this differential. Yesterday, I blew up the rear end of my Corolla. The ring and pinion are gone. The differential is soup. I'm sure it's gonna look atrocious when I pull it apart. And I was talking about all the different axles I had that I might want to swap into it. I've got a Hilux over there I was thinking about using the axle out of. I've got my trusty turbo truck here I was thinking about using the axle out of, and I've got a 99 Tacoma 2-wheel drive axle that I was talking about using. And after doing a bunch of measuring, a bunch of thinking, and trying to figure out what was gonna make the most sense, we're gonna be using this turbo truck axle. So since we're using this axle, we're gonna need an axle to put under this thing, and that's where the 99 Tacoma axle comes in. I would love to use the Hilux axle, but unfortunately the spring perches are too narrow for the Corolla, the turbo truck, or the Tacoma. All of them have the same width spring perches, and then the Hilux is about 2 inches narrower. I've got a feeling it's the truck frame from the 70s, but either way, not too concerned. This morning, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna run into the backyard, I'm gonna rip out that Tacoma axle from my pile of axles. We're gonna take this thing apart. We're gonna put a Tacoma axle under the rear of this, which is gonna give it a bit more offset in the rear, which is not a bad thing. It sticks in quite a bit. And we're gonna use this axle in the Corolla, which is also gonna give it a little bit more offset. So the Corolla is gonna be about 2 inches wider, and this thing is gonna be about 3 inches wider than what's currently in the cars. We're just gonna have to start wrenching things away, getting the axle swapped over, and hopefully we can do so in a timely manner. No guarantees about that. I'm probably gonna have to have a drive shaft made, so I might end up waiting on that. But for now, we're gonna get these axles swapped over. Here we've got my pile of axles. This is the axle we're gonna be using for the turbo truck. It's got the same 7.5-inch ring gear. I'm not exactly sure what the rear end gear ratio is, but I'm sure it's similar enough. Now we're gonna unload this axle, get it set up, take all of the springs off of it and everything like that. And then once we get everything set up with it, we're gonna pull the truck in a little bit further, get the axle out from under the truck. Once we get the axle out of the truck, the axle out from under the truck, we can start mocking this under it. Shouldn't be too bad. It's got the proper spring perches, they're the proper distance apart. So in all honesty, it should just be removing and reinstalling the U-bolts. If you're doing this at home, replace your U-bolts. I'm not gonna replace my U-bolts because I'm poor right now. But if you want to do this at home and you want to do it legitimately, I highly, highly, highly recommend replacing your U-bolts for the axle. They are one-time use U-bolts, and it's just worth it to not have any sort of question about it. I jumped down there and I made pretty quick work of getting everything disconnected. The axle is now just sitting on the leaf springs, brakes, drive shaft, and all the U-bolts and everything are disconnected. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna lift this axle out of there. It's probably gonna be a little bit of a pain since it's the spring under. You gotta lift it over the springs and get it out. Probably gonna have to roll the Corolla out so I can get the axle straight sideways. Once the axle's out, I can start trying to fit this axle up in there. The brakes are on the wrong side, so you can see the brake line comes down on the passenger side on the pickup axle. This Tacoma axle, it comes down on the driver's side, so I'm either gonna have to swap these lines around, or I'm gonna have to do something over there. And I might even need to weld a little perch on here so I can bolt the T to it so that we're, you know, securing our brake lines. So I got a little bit of work ahead of me, but for now, I'm just gonna get that axle out and start getting this axle mocked up. Once it's mocked up, I know exactly where the brake lines go, where everything needs to go, and I'll start getting stuff figured out. Got the axle out, and I took some measurements, and this is actually a 56-inch wheel mount surface axle, and that's a 60. So we're actually only going up 1 inch on the Corolla and 4 inches on the turbo truck. Hopefully it's not too big of a deal. The spring perches are the same distance apart, and that is the most important part because that means it'll just bolt right in there. Brakes are right now my biggest issue. If I can get the brakes sorted and situated, I don't see there being another major issue. So I'm gonna get back to it, get these brakes figured out, get this axle under the turbo truck, and hopefully sooner than later we'll have the turbo truck rolling, driving, and out of the garage. All right, so I swapped these lines around. These are the same lines that were on this axle. Some of the mount points worked out. I had to add one because this was here, so I put one there. It looks like it should do okay for me. I'm hoping that there's no clearance issues or anything like that. So now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna stuff this axle back in the same way we got the other one out, and we should have this axle in place in not too much time at all. I'm probably gonna have to add one more little tab bracket for the T that goes there, but I'm not exactly sure where it goes yet, so I'm gonna wait till it's in place so I know where to put the threaded nut. All in all, there ain't much to it but to do it, so I'm gonna get that axle, stuff it under here, and see what we can do. We got the axle brakes bled. I replaced the lug stud that was broken. I've got new oil in the differential. All I've got left is to torque the wheels and we should be good to go. Drive shaft's back on, brakes are hooked up, bled, wheels are on, e-brakes hooked up, but these cables are a little bit too long so it doesn't seem to work right, but that's all right, it's an automatic for now. And you can see how much wider this thing is. Those wheels are going to tuck up in here nice. I think it's gonna look good and honestly pretty stoked. We got everything torqued down. Last thing left to do is pull it out and you know me. We'll see if this rear end holds up to a burnout first thing first. It holds up to a burnout. I'm stoked. I think it's got slightly more aggressive gears in it, but I didn't even check. It definitely did a burnout with ease. Brakes seem to do okay. All in all, I think we're doing pretty good. I'm gonna go take it for a cruise on the street, see how it does, clean up in here, and we can start working on the Corolla. Took Turbo Truck for a drive. It did great, felt great, no issues. The gear ratio is a little bit more aggressive, so the speedometer's off, but nothing I can't deal with. And for now, I'm just stoked that it's back on the road and I didn't have it down for more than a few hours. All that leaves us with is getting this Corolla going. So we've got the axle we're gonna put under it from the turbo truck, and we have a blown up axle in here. I am going to be pulling this out. I'd also like to pull the differential out of the housing and see what kind of carnage we caused. I know it was some pretty crazy carnage, but it is what it is. We're gonna pull it out, we're gonna get that axle in, and hopefully we can get it rolling again today. I don't think we're gonna be able to get it driving today. The main reason I don't think we're gonna be able to get it driving today is because the drive shaft is already too long and that diff's a bit bigger, so it's going to make the drive shaft even more too long. And on top of that, the drive shaft under there uses M8 hardware, some 12mm nuts, and the drive shaft flange on the axle uses M10 hardware or 14mm nuts. So it's not ideal, but we'll be able to get it rolling again. We'll probably get the e-brake hooked up, that way we can, you know, stop it from rolling as well. But we're gonna have to get a drive shaft made. I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna do. I might go for a one-piece drive shaft instead of a two-piece, take care of the carrier bearing. I'll cross that bridge when I get there, but for now, I'm gonna get all of the mechanical stuff I can done, get this axle under here, and get the Corolla rolling with the proper axle so we can at least get measurements for drive shaft and start getting stuff mocked up. Got the Corolla in the air, so we're gonna go ahead and start taking stuff off. Very similar architecture to what I was dealing with on the other axles. Spring under, couple shocks, brake lines, e-brake lines, and we'll be good to go. So I'm gonna rip tires off, start pulling this whole thing out, and hopefully we can get it out in a fairly reasonable amount of time, because I want to get this thing under there as soon as possible. For now, we're gonna jump into a time lapse and get this thing ripped apart. All right, so we got the differential pulled out, and well, there is what I would call differential soup in here. Lots of metal, lots and lots of metal. But what's completely and totally astounding to me, and I don't even know how I pulled it off, is the ring and pinion are fine. There's a couple little like slightly scarred spots, like you can see some metal got caught some places. But all in all, the ring gear and the pinion gear, neither of them are super torn up. There's no teeth missing. Like I said, there's a little bit of scarring, but the spider gears inside the diff are, well, you can hear that. That's because there's a lot of movement in there. The spider gears shredded themselves. So the spider gears are what make a differential, and when you weld a differential, you weld the spider gears to where they can't move. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna weld these spider gears to where they can't move, and this should be a good diff again. And then I can put it back in and I can have a running car. It's gonna be a little bit of a pain because of the way it's designed with these small holes. But I feel like if I get those all welded up, everything cleaned out real good, clean up the axle, we'll be able to get this stock axle back under there. We won't need a modified drive shaft. We won't need a shortened drive shaft. We won't need a drive shaft flange. So I'm going to bust the welder out. We're going to get this thing welded up, get the Corolla back together, and hopefully by this evening, we can be taking it for a test drive with a welded diff. And no more launches. Nope. Nope. Be very, very nice to it from here on out until we get the nice new upgraded diff in there. That ought to clean all the brake clean out of there. Maybe burn some oil off too. Best it doesn't happen while I'm welding it anyway, that's for sure. Alrighty. Oh. Yeah. God damn it. Stop. I guess welding on some soaked ass fucking was not the best. Oh yeah, it smells great in here now. You know, sometimes I make stupid decisions.
Start it up.
Remember, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so don't do this. Bad idea. Do not take ring and pinions apart unless you have the proper tools to put them back together. I do not. This is probably going to explode. I'm hoping it lasts 500 miles. Very much so. Not the way to do things. Woo! Big fire. Oh! Woo! No, you're okay. Let's move the big boomy juice away. Smother it with itself. My girlfriend said this would be a good idea, so we have a fire extinguisher now. All I did was slightly burn myself, and you're not wrong, it was more than once. All right, so after starting multiple fires that needed to get put out, overheating my welder, needing to wait for it to cool off, and a few other things, we finally got this differential welded up. It's still extremely hot right now, but it's all welded up. You can see in there, there's a giant slug of metal, and I welded as many of the pieces of the spider gear together as I possibly could. So we should have a good to go welded diff. Now I just need to put this thing back together. Like I said, I am not telling you the proper way to do this. I don't have the proper tools to make sure the preset is good on the diff. I'm gonna try my best to make sure the gear pattern looks decent, but there's only so much I can do. So I'm just gonna get back to it, get this stuff back together, and hopefully this works. Like I said, I'm hoping for like 500 miles. If I can get 500 miles, I'll be stoked. All right, so I got this differential back together as best as I know how. It seems to spin free and do okay. There were a couple chunks of metal in there that I had to get out that snuck their way all the way up towards the pinion, but I think it'll be all right. I then also went ahead and cleaned this out the best I could. I used a bunch of brake clean and rags and tried to clean it as best I can. So now I'm going to throw a layer of RTV on this thing, throw the diff back in it, throw the axles back in it, then throw the whole axle assembly back under the Corolla with the welded diff, take it for a drive and see how it does. Only one way to know. Look at that. It's in there. Now I just got to get the shafts back in, brake lines back on. Yeah, we're just getting started, but the diff's back in the housing. We've got the axle back together. I went ahead and I even oblonged the holes for the centering pins just a little bit to move the axle just that tad bit back that we were trying to move it before, make it a little bit easier. We got both shafts in, we've got the differential in, and all of the sudden, when I spin this axle shaft, it actually spins everything. Look at that, look at that. Spinny spins, all the spinny spins. So, since it spins, everything seems to be good. It seems to be locked together. We're gonna throw it back under the car, put everything back together. After fighting it for a minute, I think we've got it completely back together. We got the brakes bled, e-brake lines on, suspension's together, shocks are on, tires are on, and that means there's only really one thing left to do, and that's to make sure that these tires spin with the engine. Look at that. And the brakes even stop it. Look at that. That means we have a driving Corolla again. It never quit running, but it did quit driving. And it's not quite dark out. It's real close. The sun's gone, but it's not dark. So I'm gonna go take it for a quick cruise, make sure it doesn't break as soon as I give it any sort of throttle, and then I'll be done for the night. I'll go in, wash up, and not think about the Corolla for 12 hours. We have headlights, but our headlights are extremely bright because they're LED, and I don't like blinding other drivers on the road. All right. Definitely kicks out a little more than it did before. All right, and it runs, it drives, it feels pretty darn good. I don't hear any horrible rear end noises, and now that the diff is welded, it whips around pretty dang hard. So this thing is an absolute blast to drive. I am so excited for where this thing is going. That's it for now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and I sure hope to catch you on the next one.